But for me, and just for anyone out there that kind of wants to speed up the process and that's okay with maybe not the best cheddar in the store, but like a really yummy one that just happens to come shredded, I want to be like the person who holds your hand as you do things that you worry like your friends might judge you for.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Eliza Barbanel. Jessie Sheehan is all about baking. She's the host of the baking podcast She's My Cherry Pie on Radio Cherry Bomb, and the author of 4 baking cookbooks, including her newest, Salty, Cheesy, Herby, Crispy, Snackable Bakes. This book ventures into all savory territory, from biscuits and scones to what she calls toasty handhelds, kind of like a fancy Hot Pocket. And this episode will have you craving them all. Jessie Sheehan, this is Taste. Thank you for coming on my podcast.
It is so exciting to be here, and thank you for having me.
What's it like to be on the other side of the mic, so to speak?
I'm totally crazy. I mean, I was just saying before we started, I have obviously been on people's podcasts before, but since I started hosting one, almost 2 years ago-ish, I haven't been a guest. So it feels really exciting and kind of weird.
Well, I'm honored to take you on this journey. And if you feel the need to ask me some questions halfway through, I won't be upset about it either.
That might actually happen. So thank you for clarifying.
To start off today, I'm wondering if you can tell me about the last delicious baked good that you've eaten, because I feel like it must be a good one.
Yes. So I have a house upstate that's kind of near a little town called Wassaic, New York, which is also near Armenia, New York. And a friend of mine, Ariel Votiv, has an amazing little bakery called Vitsky Bakery. And it's only open on the weekends. Maybe she's open Fridays now. I'm not sure. And she makes a delicious cardamom bun. And kind of like, I don't know, anyone and everyone with a heartbeat. Like, I'm into cardamom buns, and I love hers.
That sounds great. And I feel like I'm always so interested when I talk to bakers and recipe developers about how much of like the baked goods you're consuming outside of the home versus making yourself. Obviously, you're about to be in book promo mode, so that's kind of a strange time for baking. Do you find yourself baking at home at all these days?
So that's such a good question. And this is like, I'm hoping I don't get too much hate mail from this, but like I don't actually find baking to be like this meditative, wonderful, like now I can chill situation. I think because I do it professionally. So if I'm in like professional baking mode, like I am right now, just like, making things for sometimes I do some brand work with Cherry Bomb, making things for that, or I'm making a lot of recipes from my new book to kind of do collabs with people and sort of get my pre-orders up. And all of that does not feel like, oh my God, this is so fun. I just took out like flour and butter. Oh my God, what's it going to be? What's it going to turn into? Instead, I feel like it's work. So I would say that in general, when I home bake, it's because I have like free time and because, and when I'm using like home bake, like, yes, I'm at home, but I'm talking about baking that you're not doing for your job, that I will like, if we're having people over for dinner, like this summer, my husband grew like a lot of peaches and sour cherries and we had a lot of raspberries. So I was making tons of different like crisps and crumbles and doing that kind of stuff, but more because like I was in entertaining mode and like someone said, can you please bring dessert when they invited me over? And then of course I cried because like, don't make me. No, only kidding.
But of course they ask you. I feel like if you're showing up to a dinner, you have to be asked to bring dessert.
So does that happen to you?
Well, people do ask me to bring dessert because I do cakesy. And so I feel like professionally I'm aligned with baked goods, but I don't actually bake a lot myself. Like Tanya, who's my co-editor in the magazine, is the pastry chef among us. And I feel like I'm always connected to bakers. But if people ask me to bring dessert, like I'm probably bringing fruit and ice cream. Like I'm not a big baker, actually. So it's disappointing, I think. But it's funny to hear about that. And I feel like also I'm interested in your perspective on baking because you're the host of She's My Cherry Pie, which is the name of your podcast on Cherry Bomb. And you get to talk to so many different kinds of bakers on that show. I'm curious if having these conversations with other bakers changes the way that you think about baking for yourself or maybe the kind of industry around dessert and baking that we're in right now.
So it definitely, I would say I don't know if it's changed, but it's like broadened my perspective about the industry just because I am like a home baker, who develops recipes for media outlets and like writes cookbooks and hosts this baking podcast, but I'm not professionally trained. I worked in a bakery many, many years ago, and that was sort of my training, as it were. But I'm not professionally trained, and I've never worked in any kind of fine dining establishment or anything like that. So it's been so interesting not only to interview so many bakers who are professionally trained, but so many bakers who are part of like the fine dining establishment and worked in professional pastry kitchens, whether they're still doing it or they've left, and learning sort of about their experience there, learning why they stay versus why they go, because some of them are still doing that. Many of them have now left and opened up their own bakeries. So I feel like what's been cool about it is more learning about all the people in my industry that maybe I don't interface with on the regular. I feel like the people I know are like people who are, I know from social media, or I know because I live in New York City and I go to different events and meet people. And that can sometimes be different than people who are probably not at those events because like they're at work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I also feel like for myself with having a podcast, it's such a great excuse to just get really nosy and ask people questions that maybe you wouldn't if you were interfacing with them like at their restaurant or at an event or something like that. Do you find that you pick up on any tips and tricks and skills based on the conversations you're having?
Oh my gosh, yes. Like two answers to that question, because the first is yes, yes, yes. It's so fun to be nosy. Less so about personal stuff, because I don't know about you, but I'm like a crazy researcher before I have a guest on. Like this is so different than some people, I guess, but I like to know everything about the person so that nothing they say can surprise me. So I'm usually surprising my guests like, remember when you got that Easy Bake Oven when you were 4 and your mom said, no, sweetie, you can't put your hand in there? Like, I will find that shit on the internet and then I will ask my guests about it. So, and they'll be like, oh my God, how'd you find that? So in some ways, I know everything about them personally, but because I do a deep dive into the guests, like signature bake, we say, it's so fun to be able to ask questions about why someone wrote a recipe the way they wrote it, or why they like add an ingredient that they did, or like, but there's buttermilk in here, Rose Levy-Berenbaum, who was a guest. Why are you not adding baking soda to this recipe? And it's so amazing to hear the answers to those questions. And in terms of incredible tips, so I think it's a Claire Saffitz tip that she told me about on the pod, but so did Claudia Fleming, who uses the tip. When you want to have a very flaky pie dough, let's say, often what you'll do is is it okay to go a little deep into a recipe?
I would love for you to go deep on a recipe.
Awesome. Because I forget, it's not my podcast.
No. I'm setting you up to like excavate into this recipe right now.
I love you. And I love that verb. I'm going to excavate. So when you're making pie dough, for instance, a trick is to do a letter fold with a lot of different pastry, actually, not just pie dough. To get flakiness, to get layers, you'll take your piece of dough, let's say. It's in, let's say, a rectangular shape. You're folding like a third of it over, and then the bottom third over and the top third over on top of that, like, not that anyone writes letters anymore, but like you were folding up a business letter. So that's the way that people get a flaky pie dough. Then they roll that out, they rotate it, and they do that letter fold again. Well, what I think Claire taught Claudia, and they both taught me, is rather than do that, take your rectangle, cut it into 3 pieces, let's say, pile them on top of each other, roll it out, cut it, and stack. So it's so, now that I'm saying it out loud, maybe it doesn't sound so much easier, but in my head and when I've done it, it's so much easier than worrying about a fussy letter fold. You're just cutting dough into pieces, piling it up and rolling it out. So I love that tip. Can I give you a couple more?
Yeah, and I just want to say another thing I like about that tip is just that you're actually physically touching the dough less, so it's not warming up as much. And I think for me, I really don't mess around with pastry because I've had negative experiences, but often the failure comes from your body heat is warming up the dough and the butter and it starts to melt and it's harder to work with. So what you're talking about makes sense also because you're kind of handling it less and using like a knife or an object a little bit more.
Honey, you are a genius. Yes, I didn't even think of that, but yes, of course, that's a really good point. Yeah, it's handling it less. It's just a simpler task. Also, as a recipe writer, it's not it's easy, but even as I was explaining it out loud, it's not that easy to explain what a letter fold is. So to just say, cut your rectangle into 3 even pieces, pile them on top of each other, roll it out.
Think about like the page space that you're saving with that.
100%. And then I also just wanted to mention Zoe Francois was just on my podcast. Zoe was telling me about a way to make sure that you don't burn the bottom of cookies, which is that you layer 2 cookie sheets and then obviously place the cookies on the top layer, and that will give them a little more insulation so the bottoms don't burn. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that Rose Levy Berenbaum has a great tip for like foolproof ganache, which is make it in your friggin' food processor. And it's like you grind up the chocolate in the food processor, then you pour in the warm, heavy cream. It's like magic. So easy, so amazing. So yes, yes, yes. I have learned so many things from my guests.
I love that. And I think it's interesting because audio format is not necessarily how people learn to cook, but then the same way it absolutely is. Like your grandma or your mom, whoever's in the kitchen, is explaining things to you. And normally you have that visual indicator and you don't with a podcast. So I think like trying to do a recipe just from listening to it might be tricky, but hearing someone talk about their perspective on baking and the tips that they've heard that they want to pass down is really intimate and kind of a cool way to be hearing about it in a podcast form.
I totally agree with you. I also, at least in the baking world, I'm not sure this is happening in cooking too, but maybe it is. I feel like tips and hacks are weirdly having a moment, and like everyone's obsessed with them, and like I'm being asked to create content that's just about making showing people tips. So,
yeah. It's funny. I feel like 2010 food media tip hack was a big thing. And it's weird because you obviously can't make a recipe on like tips and hacks alone. But I do think that sometimes someone is just showing their knowledge to you. And when you learn that, then it kind of helps you think about, well, what else could I be optimizing or doing differently?
Totally.
So I want to talk to you about your new book, Salty, Cheesy, Herby, Crispy, Snackable Bakes. What a title. This is your 4th baking book, but it's your first all-savory book. What inspired that decision?
So, honestly, and like I was trying to maybe should I lie? Honestly, my editor.
Okay. Shout out to your editor.
I wanted to write another sweet book because sweet baking will always hold like a very special place in my heart, even though I love savory bakes too. And also what I realized, which is so funny, I actually gravitate towards the savory bake in the pastry case when I'm like in a bakery. And
Me
yet
too.
what I actually want to make at home is the sweet stuff. I'm not like, oh my God, so fun. I think I'll make a savory scone. I would never say that. That would never come out of my mouth. So it was my editor who suggested it. And like I cried because I was like, I can't believe it. I can't do that. And then I got on board. And I think that she was not wrong, since I weirdly think that savory baking is having a moment. I mean, Erin McDowell wrote her amazing savory baking book. I think it pubbed like a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm off. Maybe am I off by 2 years? But I think it was a year ago. And like she and I were both recently interviewed for like Pastry Arts magazine, all about savory baking. And I don't know if you saw it, but the Wall Street Journal did like a piece. I think they were maybe interviewing bakery owners, I think nationally, maybe focused on the West Coast. I can't quite remember. But all these bakery owners were saying, you know what? Like people really want like cheese and herbs in their baked goods right now. Like we are getting so many requests for that. So good news for me and my publisher and my editor, because I'm hoping that will help, sort of make this book kind of not only, gosh, as you well know, the October is so packed with baking books. It's like really, I won't lie, frightening, because every single book I've written has come out in May, and this is my first fall book, and I'm literally crying because it's so busy. But I'm hoping it will be something that makes the book stand out from the other baking books and there's some incredible baking books and also just some incredible savory books coming out, cooking books coming out. But I'm hoping this will sort of make it stand off to the side a little bit because it's a little bit different. I also think the fact that it's easy baking, so it's savory, but it's also like, just a minute, you can do this in like 20 minutes or less with a bowl and a whisk and like some cheese from the grocery store.
Yeah, I think those are both really interesting things that appeal to people right now. And I agree with you. I do think that savory baking is having a moment. I selfishly always like to eat the savory things in the case. So maybe I'm just trying to say that so that more of that is out there. But I do think when you go to bakeries, it does seem like there are more options. And I'm so interested in like why that might be. I don't know if you've stopped to try to psychoanalyze the trend at all. I think maybe like the heritage grain movement or like seasonal produce in general is kind of impacting things.
That's so interesting. I'm embarrassed to say that I have not given it a lot of thought. The only thoughts I've had are yay.
Yeah, and here are many recipes for you.
Yes. But I think the seasonal grain thing is really interesting. I also think it's, just people constantly pushing the envelope and like, why should the croissant be filled? I mean, ham and cheese croissant, obviously, we know, but why should it be filled with chocolate? How about let's put like za'atar and labneh inside? Well, maybe you couldn't. Maybe you can bake with labneh, but like let's like zhuzh things up in ways that people aren't necessarily used to seeing, and let's always just be pushing the envelope on what we can make.
Yeah, I think that really is what it comes down to is there's just such a strong baking industry and movement here in the U.S. that already has been kind of pushing things forward, and savory is this whole less charted territory, maybe.
I also think that people, which makes me so sad I want to cry, but people are like so scared of sugar right now, I feel like, or scared is maybe not the right word, but like people are definitely like, oh my God, that's so sweet. And I'm just like, yeah, like, of course. Well, that's what we want. One of my kids is like that. He's like, oh gosh, too sweet. I'm like, who is your actual mother? This could not be my child. So I do think it may have something to do with that too, that people are sort of, and I get it. Like people are like not necessarily wanting to eat something so sugary sweet and yummy. You're still eating something really buttery, but like this time it has like savory elements and not sweet elements to it.
Definitely. So I want to talk about savory elements. You kind of have different categories of savory baked good in your book. Would you say there are core categories, or how would you kind of break down the spectrum of savory baked goods that are available?
So I think what I tried to do, at least in the book, is sort of like create and organize the chapters like almost like morning to night. I mean, not exactly, but I sort of start with sort of savory bakes you've probably seen before, like muffins, biscuits, and scones is like the first chapter. And then I have a chapter called Sliceables, which is like, tea loaves, quick breads, however people like to describe them. And I call them snacking breads, but they're like snacking cakes. So like small 1-layer savory cakes that are typically baked in like an 8 by 8 by 2 inch pan. I love a savory cake, so it was very important to me to include savory breads or savory cakes in the book. And I feel like all of that is sort of breakfasty, lunchy a little bit. And then we move into a chapter of something I called like toasty handheld.
Yeah, I love that name. To me, I think of Hot Pocket.
Totally. And there is a Hot Pocket, and there are a Hot Pocket like inspired treat. But basically a toasty handheld is sort of exactly what it sounds like something that you're eating out of hand at a picnic, at a potluck, like at the breakfast nook, leaning up against the kitchen counter, like just something that basically can go in your hand. And that chapter calls for a lot of puff pastry because, again, it's like an easy baking book. So I'm not teaching anyone to make puff pastry in this book, but and I'm not the first to say this, but store-bought puff pastry is so delicious, and there are amazing brands out there that you can easily find in your regular old supermarket. And it just like elevates everything because it's flaky and delicious. So
Yeah.
that is a product I used a lot in that chapter, but I also used like one of my claims to fame is that I have this melted butter pie dough. So it doesn't require that you have to like cut cold butter into flour, which can be intimidating and difficult. You don't need to rest the dough, which can also, can we just say, be really annoying. You don't have to then rest it again after you've rolled it out, et cetera, et cetera. It's melted butter pie dough. It's literally like melted butter, milk, a teeny bit of baking powder, some salt, and some flour. You're whipping it up really fast, and then you're using it right away. And I use that for a lot of my, for a lot of those toasty handhelds.
I want to come back to the puff pastry thing really quick because
Of course.
you said there are a bunch of brands that are really good, but I feel like there's kind of one or two brands that most people call for. So what's the one that you prefer?
It's so funny. We talk about brands so much on my pod because people love to hear. And also, does it sound dumb to say, do you say pod? As it's coming out of my mouth, I feel like I'm trying to be hip or something.
I should think about it. I feel like I don't often refer to the podcast while I'm doing the podcast.
Right.
Maybe I'll try saying the pod and see if it sounds
Okay, see if
fun.
it sounds weird.
I say like friend of the pod. That's like
that's
a phrase
cute.
in the lexicon.
Okay, I like that. I've never said friend of the pod, but I like that.
So on your pod.
Yeah, on my pod. We always ask about brands, but for some reason I had this moment where I was like, can I say brands? But dumb. But anyway, I used Pepperidge Farm exclusively when I developed recipes for the book because I find it's the easiest and the least expensive. Not that it's cheap. Groceries are not cheap right now, but it's less than, and I'm probably going to fuck up the name, Dufour.
When I worked at Bon Appetit, that was the brand that like for Thanksgiving packages people would talk about or things like that.
Yeah, I think that one is fantastic. I hope I'm not like, I hope I'm not wrong, but in my head, I thought, oh, that's probably going to be more expensive.
I think it is.
Yeah, I'm going to use Pepperidge Farm for this book. I know everyone can find it. If they upgrade on their own, amazing, but they don't have to.
Yeah, there's just a little extra puff, maybe. So I like some of the kind of savory applications that you can do in this book with ingredients. I feel like it must be kind of fun to get to tap into the kind of savory side of the pantry. Like you do these muffin-size egg puffs that have the prosciutto wrapping instead of a cupcake wrapper, and they get all crispy. I don't actually even really like eggs, but I saw that recipe and I thought this is really cool and smart and something that like there probably isn't a sweet version of prosciutto that you could wrap around a muffin. Are there any other ingredients that are savory ingredients that you found unlocked something kind of special in terms of a recipe?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of unlocked something special in a lot of recipes because I realized I used it over and over. And I love how retro this is, but pimento stuffed green olives out of a jar. I put those with cream cheese in like a pinwheel cookie. I put them in something I call the cocktail loaf and like just filled it with those and like yummy Swiss cheese. I think it was Swiss. I put them in, oh my God, I wrapped cheddar cheese dough around them and turned them into these like little, just have to say, like really awesome cheese wrapped olive balls, like to serve at a party, like so good. They just like kept coming back to me. And the only other thing I was going to flag is pickles, because I think it's only actually in one recipe, which now that I'm saying that, like if I'm ever writing another savory book, I think pickles need to be in more than one recipe because I love pickles. But Ritz crackers, a slice of like a sour pickle, and like some like Monterey Jack cheese, and you melt that in the oven. Oh my God, so unbelievably delicious. Like, it's funny, when my tester was testing that, she's like, well, is this a recipe? I was like, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And of course, I had that moment where I'm like, I'm a fucking genius. I came up with Ritz crackers, pickles, and cheese. I am amazing. I think I'll Google it. And of course, it's all over TikTok. But for the record, I did not know it was on TikTok.
Well, I like how you started out saying that you didn't even want to do a savory book. Now it seems like you want to do a pickles baking book to me.
Totally.
Your editor's taking notes right now.
Exactly.
That's so funny. So I feel like in the sweet baking pantheon, there's kind of like all-star recipes, at least in like all Americana baking. There's like the chocolate chip cookie or cheesecake, and maybe biscuits are like that girl in the savory baking world. But I'm curious if after developing all these savory baking recipes, there's another category of savory bake that you think more home bakers should be like putting in their repertoire, making at home.
Oh, that's a good question. Because my home bakers are more like, I think the people that dig kind of what I do are more into making things easy.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy. So what I would say is just like all the things that are already really easy to make, like biscuits, like scones, like quick breads, like these easy, like, pockets that you might want to fill with chocolate or berries, you can now fill with like cheese. Like, just take advantage of all of that kind of like infrastructure, baking infrastructure, but put cheese and herbs and crispy things in it, and you will be like really happy. I also want to say that for this book, again, because like easy peasy was like and what's so funny? I just have to pause in this moment. I always hate it when I'm interviewing people and they like answer a question that I want to ask them in like 2 questions and they answer it too early. So if this is too early, feel free to ask me again.
No, I have no agenda. I'm just on this ride with you.
Okay.
Yeah. If you want to say something that I'm interested in hearing about, then it's great for me.
But are you ever like that? Like, I'm so mean, like to my guests. I would never let them know, but I'm like, fuck, I can't believe they asked me that.
I don't know. I think for me, I feel like I'm meeting someone at a party who I've followed on Instagram for a while, and I have things that I want to ask them, and I have things that I know about them, but I don't want to make them feel like I'm moving the conversation too far. So it's always kind of like a jigsaw puzzle in terms of the questions.
I get it. And obviously I would never make anyone feel bad. Like I never know. I would
but
never
between
let them,
2 podcast hosts, we can talk about it.
Two pod hosts. So the only other thing I was going to say that I think if people feel, let's say, intimidated by savory baking, like, what? Why would I do that? That sounds hard, or if you're like me and you're like, what? Mince, herbs, and garlic? Absolutely not. Caramelized onions? Absolutely not. Too much work. If you are like that, then this book is for you in the sense that I really explore and like love and take advantage of my spice drawer. And in general, I am using garlic powder, and this may turn people off, so apologies, but I'm using garlic powder and onion powder and trying to get the flavors that I want without asking people to caramelize onions or mince garlic. Yes, I have recipes where I want fresh herbs, but in general, I'm really trying to take advantage of things we might already have at home that don't require you to go to a grocery store. Like, I don't want to ask you to go and buy something and then be like, well, what am I supposed to do with the rest of it? Whereas if you have the spice already in your spice drawer or you buy it, yes, you can't keep spices forever, but you can certainly keep them longer than some fresh herbs. So I guess I would also just like encourage people to take advantage of sort of these savory elements and ingredients that they might already have. The other thing I was going to say, which again, I sometimes worry is a little controversial for peeps, but sometimes all the time I use shredded cheese. Like I will buy a shredded cheese product so that I'm taking that step of shredding the cheese off of my off of the list of things I have to do when I'm making something savory. Again, if you want to shred cheese and you want to buy like a beautiful nice cheddar that you want to shred yourself, I love you so much for that. But for me, and just for anyone out there that kind of wants to speed up the process and that's okay with maybe not the best cheddar in the store, but like a really yummy one that just happens to come shredded, I want to be like the person who holds your hand as you do things that you worry like your friends might judge you for.
I love that. I feel like everybody needs someone who to give them permission sometimes. Like, not that we need that, but it feels nice to have someone who says, like, I've tested this with this really widely accessible puff pastry. I've tested this with cheese that's been pre-shredded, so maybe it does have a little bit of starch or some coating on it, but the recipe still turns out great that way. It makes it easier to start from wherever you are.
Totally. And again, I'm into fast. It just makes things go so quickly. You open your bag, you pour out your cheese, you're good to go.
Okay, so speaking of fast, to close today, I want to play a rapid fire taste check game with you. So I'll give you a category and you tell me the first answer that pops into your head.
Awesome. I can't wait.
Okay. Your favorite baking book?
Baking Illustrated. It's like a Cook's Illustrated book on baking that came out, I think, in like 2004.
Your favorite season for baking?
So I like chocolate cake in every single month of the year. So I would say every season.
No season.
No season.
The most challenging recipe to develop in your new book?
Weirdly enough, the Dutch Baby, it has like cheddar cheese and it has herbs in it. And I'm an extra kind of gal, so I kept trying to put more cheese and more herbs and then it wouldn't rise. So then I had to like pull back, which was a little bit sad, but it's still delicious.
Your go-to item to order in the pastry case at a bakery?
Chocolate chip cookie.
Your go-to ice cream flavor?
Mint chocolate chip.
Something that you will never make from scratch?
Croissant.
Your favorite local bakery?
Well, it's not local because it's not in Red Hook, which is where I live, but it's run by the guy who used to run the bakery in Red Hook named Nato. He has a bakery called Ciao Gloria in Prospect Heights in Brooklyn.
Oh, I love that bakery.
Right?
What do you get there?
That is such a good question. Nato is so sweet, and he's usually giving me things that he has, but I love his, or whatever he wants me to try. But I think it's his bombolini, like his donuts that he sells on the weekends. Oh, my God.
So good. A bakery that you wish could be your neighborhood bakery?
I think Libre Bakery. I really love that.
Yeah, their za'atar croissant I just had for the first time. Maybe it's a za'atar scone.
So good. And I think there's also like a flatbread that might come with labneh and za'atar. So good.
Okay, and finally, a fictional food scene like in a book or a movie that you wish you could eat in real life.
So my favorite book as a child, and I also read it to my kids, is called Bread and Jam for Frances. And in that book, Frances won't eat anything but bread and jam. And then finally she gets over it and she starts eating real food. And at the end of the book, her mom makes her favorite, which is spaghetti and meatballs and chocolate cake. And those are 100% my favorites.
Okay, I love that book, and I feel like it's important to say that Frances is a badger in this book.
Oh my God, she is such a badger.
She's a sweet little badger.
Yeah, that's not like a cute name for her. She's literally a badger. And I love all the Frances books so much.
I think about her every time I eat bread and jam.
Oh my God, what about, did you read the one with Best Friend for Frances with Thelma? Oh my gosh, you have to read it. Thelma is like not the best friend. Anyway, it's really, really good.
Okay, I'm going to go read this book and maybe have some bread and jam as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Eliza, we are back talking fall cookbooks. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excited about the fall season. We've been previewing many of the cookbooks coming out this fall. We're not calling these the best, the greatest, because we haven't seen the whole season. We're recording this in mid-August, so we haven't seen all the books. But really, this category we're calling big names because I think when you see a cookbook, you're like, okay, that's a person I follow. That's a person I know, either from television, from celebrity chef land, or from the internet, from social media. So many books now are being published by folks with big followings online, and we love that. So I think we've compiled a few of the ones that are kind of jumping off right now. You start. What's your first one?
My first one is by a certain someone named Dolly Parton.
I'm excited, but you tell me about this book.
Dolly Parton and her sister Rachel Parton George. The cookbook is called Good Looking Cookin', a Year of Meals, a Lifetime of Family, Friends, and Food. And as someone who aspires to be an adopted member of Dolly Parton's family, I think this is probably the closest I'm going to get. They have a ton of family recipes in the book for things like mac and cheese and spare ribs and strawberry shortcake. And I just think Dolly Parton is not only a country icon, but kind of a cooking icon. She's released a cookbook in the past. She also has the Duncan Hines cake mix brand line, which I think is super fun. And I just feel like any step you can get closer to Dolly Parton is a good path to be walking.
I so agree. I loved her costume book that we put out last fall. And this is like her second book with us here at Crown Publishing Group. And I've gotten to check out the book early. And it's such a terrific package. They call it like the way the photos and the text all come together. And like, come on the show, Dolly. Please.
Yeah, Dolly, if you're listening, I'll be super normal and chill. And I would love to talk to you. Also, I think this would be a great gift. I know we're not quite in holiday season yet, but I think if you're a Dolly Parton fan, this would be really fun to receive.
Definitely a great gift for any Dolly fans.
What's your first one to call out?
My first one is Soup Salad Sandwiches from Maddie Matheson. Now, Maddie has done cookbooks in the past, and they've been terrific, and I've been able to check them out. I've never met Maddie, but I've enjoyed his online content. And, of course, we know Maddie from The Bear, where he plays, I would say, a non-chef, more of like a goofball. But anyone who knows anything knows that he's like behind the scenes, one of the food stylists and food producers with Coco Store for this terrific show. But so Maddie's a chef in Toronto, and he has run acclaimed restaurants for a decade. And really, this is his first book that kind of really narrows the focus into soup, salad, and sandwiches, three of his favorite food categories. And really, I think the guy could probably have written a book about pho, because he writes such a love letter to broth and pho, and he worked closely with a Vietnamese chef and worked at a Vietnamese restaurant in his career, and he has such a love letter to kick off the first section of this book. I'm like, man, the guy probably wanted to write a pho cookbook, but really we know that he wanted to expand it out a bit more. And I love the light broths in the first soup section. He has a rutabaga and daikon broth. He's got a avoglamano soup that I feel is a real banger. But moving on to salads, he really has a lot of dexterity with his cookbook writing and his recipe writing. Cold broccoli salad. He's got this like recipe for a roasted shallot salad that is a little bit chefy. So I think like cool thing about Maddie is that he's like letting it all hang out and like loving every moment of it and doing these like kind of flexy chefy recipes, but also very simple recipes. Got a great love letter segueing to sandwiches about the grilled cheese, which is simply white bread and Kraft American singles. I think that's the only way to go with grilled cheese personally. And I just love the way he brings a lot of his voice and personality into it. And I think like the tuna melt is his love language with his wife, Trishy, which I thought is very sweet. And I think any fan of Maddie will love this book because it really does have his voice throughout it and lots of funny asides and quips in the head notes. And I'll close and say the man loves bologna. And he'll cut a human if someone comes at him and tries to shade bologna. And I'm the same kind of person, so I love that he's a fan of the bologna. Bologna on English muffin too. Nice little bread choice there. And you're gonna maybe interview him. We're working on that.
We'll see what happens.
Come on, publicists, make that happen. We want to have Maddie on the show, and Eliza's going to do the interview. It's going to be really fun. What's your next one?
My next one is called What Goes With What, 100 Recipes, 20 Charts, Endless Possibilities by Julia Turshen. I think Julia Turshen really knows what home cooks are looking for and want, and she has a really great approach towards like making it easy to cook at home in her newsletter, Keep Calm and Cook On. She does a lot of these matrixy charts that have like a recipe for any kind of soup where you have something brothy, aromatic, etc. And then you can kind of spin it into these different directions. And I think they've been such a success in her newsletter that it maybe led the way for this book to happen, which is kind of based in like helping you look at what's in your fridge, what's in your pantry, and make something happen from there, which I think is a skill that is kind of hard to learn as a home cook, but is the most empowering thing that you can do. So I just think this is a really great book, and I'm actually going to get to talk with Julia about it at Rizzoli Bookstore here in New York on October 16th. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll share a link to get tickets and RSVP when that's a little bit closer too.
Yeah, I can't wait to have her on the stage at Rizzoli. So those are always terrific events. And I love that she is, I think now, more of a cooking educator than a cookbook writer. And she does cooking classes online, and big fan of Julia Turshen. My next one is from Dominique Ansel, the father of the cronut.
The cronut, the cruffin, like I feel like so many combination words we owe to him.
Indeed. Life's sweetest moments, simple, stunning recipes, and the heartwarming stories. So it's a very slim book. It's only 40 simple recipes, all in the dessert category from Dominique Ansel. And really, I like the guy. I've spent some time with him. I really enjoy his company. He's got a lot to say. Hoping to have him on the show eventually. But I like this idea that he's telling some stories. He lived a kind of a crazy life. You know, he's like so trained in France and has so much technique to teach. But then he became this like kind of meme chef guy, long lines, the Corona, et cetera, et cetera. Probably like a little bit of a head fuck for the guy to have this one recipe define him, a man who really has a lot to offer. So he's probably, I haven't read the book, so I'm not saying I know the content, but he's telling stories along the way. And some of the recipes that jump out, he's got his own classic creme brulee, a hazelnut cake, and of course his tiramisu that I think I've tried in his studio before, which is like, I remember a few years back, it was one of my favorite dishes he's ever made. Evan Sung does the photography. It's going to be a terrific book. I'm really looking forward to it. What's your final one?
My final one is by Carolina Gellin. It's called Pass the Plate. I think when we talk about people who are big online in the food space that are making recipes, like Carolina is one of my favorites. And when I was looking up the book, I really loved this blurb from Deb Perlman of The Smitten Kitchen. She says, "Not a lot of cookbooks make me shouty, but this one did instantly. Everything looks so good, clever, innovative, and fresh. I hardly know what to cook first." And I felt the same way looking at the PDF. She has recipes for like chicken schnitzel with lemon gremolata and upside down pineapple coconut cake. And I just think it's cool when you can see somebody who has so much personality and success online who can make a book that feels like it's hitting on all of those same notes. So I'm excited about this one.
I'm a big Carolina fan. I had a great conversation with her in the studio. It may have aired before. It will be airing soon. My next one is Justine Cooks, a cookbook, Recipes Mostly Plants for Finding Your Way in the Kitchen by Justine Doran. We know Justine Snacks from her online persona. You know, she is somebody that really has a love for beans. She is a terrific baker, and she calls herself a breakfast romantic. And really, this book, to me, is so intimate and personal. I love the writing. I spent a couple hours with it recently, and I just loved reading through it. Terrific writer and recipe developer. She has a great sweet and savory oatmeal combination. And again, her bread baking is underrated. I love that's near the end of it. And this is a book, if you're a fan of Justine Cooks and you follow her on socials, you should definitely check out this book. I have to call it a final author, Sarah Fennell from Broma Bakery, Sweet Tooth. Her and Justine and Carolina, three of our authors here at Crown, came together. I think they had dinner together recently. All three are so unique. They're all coming out this fall, and I just love this book. It's like a huge success and already, and I love what she's doing. We're gonna have a feature about her up soon. So really, these are our big names, but we're gonna have plenty more to talk about later on in the fall. So thanks for sharing, Eliza.
You too. This is Taste is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Eliza Abarbanel. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things happening.